me begin this lecture by telling you a story to put things in perspective. It is a story about the people of Bhutan, a principality partly controlled by India that they tell about themselves. When this remote mountain country first made contact with the outside world 40 years ago, the United Nations, or UN, asked about their gross national product. The king of Bhutan said he wasn't sure his country had one of those, but was interested in knowing what a gross national product was. Once the UN explained that a gross national product was the total value of all the goods produced and all the services provided in a country in 1 year, the king said he thought Bhutan would rather not have one. They would rather have a gross national happiness. Now, here was a country where people seemed perfectly happy to have little contact with the outside world. How odd Bhutan of 40 years ago seems to us today, when modern telecommunications and world trade have virtually connected every corner of the world to every other part of the world. Unlike Bhutan 40 years ago, today's world is characterized by globalization. Thousands of books have been written about globalization, and there may be as many definitions of the term, all depending on the perspective of the writer. Now, for our purposes, let's use this definition. Globalization is the acceleration and intensification of economic interaction among the people, companies, and governments of different nations. Did you get that definition down? Let me repeat it. Globalization is the acceleration and intensification of economic interaction among the people, companies, and governments of different nations. So how does globalization work in concrete terms? Well, let me give you some examples. Cheaper modern communications have made it possible for a call center in India to provide technical support to a person who is having a computer problem in Australia or the United States or anywhere else in the world. Or a transnational sportswear corporation like Nike can design its products in Europe, produce them in Asia, and sell them in North America. And there are many US and other international companies that have built factories in Mexico to manufacture products that used to be made in the former countries. Globalization sounds like a very positive concept, a wonderful example of international cooperation that benefits all concerned. But it is at the same time a subject that ignites the anger and mistrust of many people in the world, environmentalists, unionists, anarchists, and some governments, among others. You can see that the skeptics come from many different fields. Some skeptics feel that globalization allows rich countries to take advantage of poor countries, which skeptics feel are only hurt by trying to be more capitalistic. And globalization is definitely about capitalism. Its goal is to increase the flow of goods and capital around the world. We might call it the brother of capitalism. If globalization is included in a book that focuses on the United States, it's because the world sees the United States, and to a lesser degree Western Europe and Japan, as the driving force behind the process of globalization. When one thinks of capitalism and large transnational corporations, the United States is probably the first country that comes to many people's minds. And two big international organizations that deal with development, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, and the World Bank, are closely associated with the United States in many people's minds. Furthermore, popular American culture, from Coca-Cola and McDonald's to popular music and TV programs, is so widespread in the world that critics of globalization are quick to point to the spread of this culture as U.S. cultural imperialism. Now, we can't really go into cultural imperialism today, but we can look at three different aspects of globalization to understand this complicated process a little better. First, we'll talk about what critics object to in globalization. Then I want to discuss some cases where globalization has been a success, and I don't mean rich Western countries. I'll finish up by talking about some concrete objections critics of globalization have in order to see if there is any solution. Critics of globalization will point out that poor countries are often given bad advice by international organizations like the IMF and the World Bank, or that these organizations try to impose unrealistic global trade rules. Often, poor countries are pressured to follow the rules as a condition for a loan or for aid. Now, for example, a poor country might be advised to adjust the value of its currency, or it might be advised to eliminate tariffs or taxes on goods imported from other countries. Many poor countries are also pressured to respect patents and copyright laws. Patents on new inventions and copyright laws most often protect technology from the West and keep the technology from being used more freely by poor countries. Poorer countries may also be told to privatize industries and banks. Privatization means that the government sells the industries and banks to private companies. Furthermore, poorer countries are often encouraged not to subsidize goods that they produce. A subsidy is money paid by a government to reduce the costs of producing goods so that their prices can be kept low and therefore competitive in the world market. These are some examples, but not all of the trade rules imposed by organizations. But I think you get the picture. Now, did you get all 5 examples down? 1, adjust currency. 2, eliminate tariffs. And 3, respect patents and copyright law. 4, privatize industry and banks. And 5, not subsidize the goods they produce. We don't have to go too far to find countries, Argentina comes to mind, that have tried to follow all these rules, only to find that their economies have suffered instead of prospering. Critics of globalization will say that the international organizations do not have good intentions, that they want conditions where rich countries or companies can take advantage of poor countries' cheap labor,